Mahmoud Mona, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today on Kalam Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Mahmoud, your bookshop and what happened to it has been in the news globally for the past week and a half, or 2 weeks almost, I think. Could you tell us, for our audience's sake, like what happened exactly?
Thank you again for having me. It was a Sunday afternoon in a late autumn year in Jerusalem. We had a quiet day and trying to shelf some of the books we have received recently, and was surprised by an unmarked police car stopping outside, and then unmarked civil dressing police officers coming in and presenting an order for search for materials that is insightful or that generates or incite for violence. I was quite surprised by this. We've been in the bookstore for 40 years. We know exactly what we're doing. We know the range of the books we're doing. We know how peaceful they are, how informative they are, how well published they are. And we are certainly not a place that promotes violence or promote any sort of incitement. They spent 2 hours looking at the books in the 2 branches across the street from each other, the Arabic branch and the English branch. What was immediately shocking, actually, is the fact that they neither knew Arabic nor English, yet they were coming to search an Arabic and an English bookstore.
Yeah.
They've gone through the shelves, basically judging the book from its cover, which is the main thing not to do in a bookstore, but that's exactly they were doing. And with the help of Google Translate, they were reading blurbs on books and define or decide if this was a topic or a book that is insightful or not. Of course, judging the book by its cover, they were going through books that had Palestinian flag, and the word Palestine, and the word Nakba, the word occupation, Gaza, any titles that seemed a little bit edgy politically, so to speak, or at least are representative of the Palestinian community, was stacked, piled, and then after 2 hours, they brought rubbish pin bags and put around 300 books in bags, and then they took them to the car, and they asked us to accompany them to the station. We went to a station. I'm going through this very fast. It's a whole 6 hours ordeal. We went to the station, lots of waiting and lots of questioning, and then eventually decided at night that they wanted to return most of the books to us, but they want to keep us. And they changed the legal proceeding from incitement to disrupting public order, which is a catch-all kind of phrase or legal clause in which they can basically arrest anyone. They kept us for the night. The next day, we're in front of a court. The police asked for 8 nights in which they can continue their investigation, claiming that they have damning materials and they have sophisticated investigation process and they need 8 days. The judge could see through the kind of manipulation going on, but was also, I believe, was also under the pressure from the international presence and the media. By then, the next day, there was already a global outcry. So the judge and the court had to kind of be a little bit more professional than we usually are and act a little bit more diligently with the case. And therefore asked the police, gave the police or granted the police 1 night, not 8. And the next day we were supposed to go to the court the next day, but then the police didn't actually show up to the court. In fact, they showed up a bit before the court, and they presented us with a possibility to be released without the court if we accept to be on bail and to be in house arrest for 5 days, which we accepted, and that's how we left the prison after again brushing over this 48 hours very quickly. But it's important to highlight the inhumanity and the level of violence and insults and verbal abuse and inhumane keeping conditions for humans in cells inside the Israeli detention center in which we stayed for 2 nights, close to 48 hours. It's beyond description. I mean, it's really beyond law and beyond humanity and beyond. And we were in detention, but we were treated as guilty immediately in the first second, actually. So also to call them detention center is also inaccurate because they're pretty much a prison. And with the minute you step into the system, you are already guilty rather than innocent until otherwise proven. We left, glad to be back in the civilized world to some extent with our families. And we are in these restrictions now, which we cannot. We finished the house arrest. I'm still talking to you within the first 20 days, which I'm not allowed to go back to the bookshop for the first 20 days. And allegedly, the legal proceeding is continuing, but it seems to me that they have figured out that they made a big mistake, and they're probably just gonna drop it. But they're not explicitly saying that anyway. So we'll wait if we're gonna hear back from them on legally, if they wanted more interrogation or if they have more questions or if they want to check more books or whatever. I'll just finish answering this question by saying first a big word of thank you for all the international supporters who rallied behind us and were really making noise. I think that really helped. Second, I'm inviting everyone to think how bad situation came here to the point that booksellers are being criminalized and kind of a political persecution is orchestrated against people who are supposed to be the leaders in society for promoting all the good ideas. That's what we saw ourselves doing in the last 40 years, selling books and promoting culture and celebrating literature. That should not be considered a crime. Rather, that should be an honorable job within a society and a contribution for a social and political change that we all desperately need.
Yeah. I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about the history of the bookshop that you run, the Educational Bookshop in Jerusalem. But before then, can I just clarify? So, like right now, the bookshop is closed and you're not allowed to go back to it.
No, the bookshop is actually open. This was never closed.
Okay.
And that's why I'm saying it was obvious, like they run into baseless accusations, because by the time they went back to the station and actually analyzed the books that they confiscated, they figured out that there is no incitement and there's no legal case against the books. So they shift gears, and it's us became dangerous individuals, not the bookshop.
Okay.
So the legal became disrupting public order, which is a personal case against us, me and Ahmed, the booksellers, and the bookshop became okay. So that's why there's no restriction on the bookshop. But we were asked not to go to the bookshop, but actually the bookshop is open and running, and it has been, and many people are coming to show their support and solidarity.
Okay. Could you tell us the history of the Educational Bookshop and what it's meant to you personally, but also to the community in Jerusalem, and what kind of people come to shop for books, and like what kind of community has been built by the presence of this bookshop, which sells books, like you said, from various authors, both Palestinian, Israeli, and international?
Yeah, I mean, the bookshop, this year we are celebrating 40 years into the bookshop history. It was started with, my dad started the bookshop in the early 80s. And of course, it's kind of like any other bookstores. It has grown and reacted to the context in which it's operating. We have seen it all here, from first intifadas, the peace process, second intifada, and so on and so forth. So it has been a community bookshop where people come and buy their books and buy their research materials and their novels and their candy brain and their all types of books that they like. But it's also a place where increasingly became a hub for the society to sit down and meet, to discuss, to engage, to learn. We have an open policy doors, so no one is restricted from coming to the bookshop. The bookshop is almost open 7 days a week, 8 to 8. long opening hours. It's one of the first shops to open in the street and the last place to close. And we take special pride in this. We make a point. We say a city that the bookstore is the first to open and the last to close is a city that worth of admiration and respect. It's in the main street. It has a huge glass window. We have nothing to hide. The bookshop is literally transparent. And everyone referred to the bookshop as their bookshop. It's been very interesting to even watch the words people using. Not my local bookshop, not my favorite bookshop, my bookshop. And I think that's why people take it personally, this attack, and they see it as an attack on in their kind of back garden or their own homes. We do lots of events. We help the Palfest Literature Festival. Sometimes we do our own festival. We do different cultural initiatives. The Poetry Club use the bookshop. The local press club use the bookshop. It's Jerusalem Literacy Salon use the bookshop. It's literally is just almost a community place where people just constantly come in. We are open. We have always been open to many initiatives. Some tour guides even bring visitors to the city. Diplomats, journalists, when they come to the city in order to understand it, they buy their basic intro books in the bookshop. It's a cafe as well, so that also helps in making the place a living place, a constant living place for people. We teach languages, including Hebrew and Arabic. Not we, I mean teachers use the place as. We screened movies, we have done music events. We really, because it's a family business and it's an independent, it's also has been a place where it can react quickly and we don't have to, we don't have to deal with so much bureaucracy. So people have an initiative, have an idea, they come to us, they present it. We immediately, most of the time, say yes if it is fit within our generic kind of objective of promoting culture and art, and then it becomes part of the city's cultural scene. East Jerusalem is a very small place anyway, and there's a very small institutions that deal with culture and art. So we became one of these 6-7 cultural institutions in the city that contribute to the cultural scene in East Jerusalem, where most prominently resided or East Jerusalem Palestinians lives as well. So yeah, I mean, it is a very famous bookshop and the rest of it, and that was of course obvious in this case. But really, I would like to say we are a good community bookshop, like any other community bookshop should be. And we react to the context in which we live in, whether that is socially or culturally or politically or whatever. And that's what a good bookstores does. There is people are talking about a certain thing, then we invite expert book writers to kind of address that issue and open up the conversation. We don't control, and I'll finish by saying this: we're not a political party. We have our own politics, but the bookstore is a wide range. It's a space where a wide range of topics or ideas can be discussed. This is not my personal home library, if you see what I mean. So we've always been a space, and we always would like to continue to be a space where topics and ideas and current affairs and history and art and everything can be discussed. And it's really sad that these places are being attacked. It's really sad that there's an attempt to perhaps to shrink our space. It doesn't really help anyone, to be quite honest with you. We see our roles as have been defined by Edward Said years ago. You need to always ask the difficult question. You need to always go into the peripheries, into the margins, into the, open up the scope, look at the wide picture, ask the difficult question. That's what we do as a space. And we allow these conversations to interact and to clash and to argue and so on and so forth.
I think it's almost counterintuitive when people highlight the fact that your bookstore is not necessarily a place of like radical politics, even if it could be that as well. It's a place where you'll find literature from that represent different opinions in, Israel-Palestine conflict, or on the occupation, or on Zionism, or, and some people, a lot of diplomats, for example, and sort of high up international spokespersons have said this. This is this is such a good place. It's a place where, liberal ideas can flourish. And with the kind of implication that this is a strange thing for Israel to go after, or for the current Israeli authorities to go after. But when I think about it, it almost kind of makes sense, because in this situation of uh, wars of annihilation in Gaza, and the intense military operation, the war on the West Bank now, it seems that for Israel, or for the current Israeli administration, um, any like the kind of more radical elements actually benefit you in a way. Do you know what I mean? Rather than going after what they would perceive as radical, you go after the sort of reasonable voices in society to eliminate the gray zone where people can have conversations. Would you agree with that?
I think you're right in one layer of the conversations. I mean, if we gonna adopt the narrative that Israeli state has completely lost all its democratic values or all its liberal values,
Mm,
then you're right. Then there is no red line. Then actually anyone is a target, and anyone is dangerous, and anyone is a terrorist. And you're right. Um, I don't think at this point we would probably say that Israel is the absolute oasis of democracy and absolute liberal democracy in the world. But perhaps the real categorization is somewhere in the middle, which is Israel has been in the last 30, 40 years, have been losing part of its democratic values that has tried to establish since its establishment in the 40s. Somewhere in the middle is where Israel democracy was. Uh, I mean, I'm just raising all these questions. Maybe there is no such thing as, well, you are either democratic or
mm.
not. There's no half democracy.
Yeah,
But
sure.
but 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 probably an argument could be made that Israel has kept some of its liberal values, like by the way, like the legal procedure I went through.
Sure.
You could say that it was completely manufactured, so therefore I should not have stayed any night in prison, and that's correct and that's right. But you could also say that at least there is a legal system, and I was out after 2 days, and the judge had to act in some ways against the police wish. Um, I think both are correct. Israel has built some notion of democratic values, exclusive to some at some point, gray area in some areas. And I think the story is an indication, I think, of the speed and the nosedive kind of nature of how far Israel is going into losing the reminiscences or what is left of its democratic character. And I think that's why the story, in one way, is obvious and it doesn't surprise people who are on the complete radical left, but it does worries people who are not on the radical
Yeah.
left, who somewhere in the center, that they believed that Israel had some red lines that it would not cross, and in this case, it did cross them as well. That's kind of where I see the conversation on this topic.
How has the response been? Speaking of, people being surprised or not surprised, or, um, how have you seen the response to this raid, and do you think that it's helpful?
There's two things. I think yes. I mean, the actual presence in the courts and the presence of the diplomatic court here in Jerusalem, who actually knows the bookshop and knows us personally, has been really helpful. I think literally on us them staying 6 and 7 and 8 nights, or 4 in the best case scenario, that the judge was forced to act a little bit more reasonably. So that's appreciated, and we could speak a lot about the inactivity or the inability of the diplomatic missions to do much, actually. But in this case, at least in my very selfish, narrow case, yield some welcomed results. I don't think that's what the diplomatics are for here, but in that case, it's I take it happily that it was helpful in my case.
Yeah.
The international support is phenomenal. It really is phenomenal. I mean, we've been building relationship with people and institutions and writers and authors and culture institutions and book clubs and so on around the world for 40 years. We never really tested that relationship. We never really wanted to test it, to be quite honest. We were happily just building relationship. We didn't want to, we were not in the intention that at one point we were going to cash it in or in some ways. But it is nice and it is heartwarming to see that actually this relationship is appreciated. It is kept. People do remember and do admire and do appreciate. And I think the international outcry is important in this regards. And I don't know if it helps, but at least it's heartwarming and you know you're not alone. And I think that's a very important act of solidarity as well. The notion, the third topic, if you like, is the Israeli solidarity. Yeah, that's here. It becomes a little bit inconvenient topic, but why not? Let's talk about it as well. We did receive support from a wide range of Israeli society, including from the center, which is not usually what happens here. But I think the graveness of the crossing that red line, so to speak, quote unquote, have also mobilized people in the center in Israel, collection of writers, institutions, and so on, writing in our favor. Of course, we need all the support we can get, so we're not going to object to that. But it is interesting to analyze it. Some of these support is an active, genuine form of solidarity with us, and I appreciate that. The others is a bit more cynical. The others is categorized along the line like, we're supporting you because we are next. So it's not supporting you because of you. It's supporting you because if they go over you, it will be an Israeli bookstore, an Israeli center, or an Israeli cinema, or an Israeli film afterwards, which is kind of very cynical and quite questionable because it's not genuinely based on right and wrong. It's again based on selfish self-protection aspects. Well, anyway, it has been only 2 weeks, so I don't want to read into it too much. But that's my observation so far.
Sure, that is super interesting, and I've also seen on in my sort of social media feeds people like pro-Israeli people or Israelis themselves who haven't said a word about different, crimes that Israel has committed over the past 15 months, but this was kind of like a line in the sand, like this was not okay. So it is super interesting to hear that that response. So I've kept you for far too long, Mahmoud. Mona, thank you so much for speaking to us. But I'd just like to hear you comment on this raid in the larger context of what Israel is doing in the West Bank currently, because right now what Israel calls like a military operation, which other people would categorize as a war on the West Bank, has displaced more people, more Palestinians than since 1967. 40,000 or more people have been displaced from their homes because of Israeli military incursions, and now tanks are rolling into Jenin. So do you see this aggression against your bookshop as part of a wider aggression on the West Bank?
I mean, I'm always careful to run into general conclusions and big pictures analysis, particularly in so early. I mean, I think the war on Palestinian identity and Palestinian collective cultural and political identity is something that did not stop in 48. So also naturally this fit in. Whether there is a concentrated attempt now that is devised into sections, and then the attack on Jenin and the bookshop is part of it, is I'm less like to make. It's also, I would like to remind the audience that this is nothing compared to people's houses being destroyed and loved ones being killed. I mean, me spending 2 nights in a dungeon in West Jerusalem is nothing compared to people suffering in places where there is much more and a higher level of violence and so on. I'm not being humble, but being also honest and correct. I mean, I think cultural institutions in Palestinian communities have an important role to play in keeping people's sanity and to keeping people's ability to cope with difficult situations, and creating spaces where questions and answers are being exchanged is important. It's important in the mental level as well. A lot of the times people ask me what to do, and I say I keep people's sanity, because that's what books and literature and but also films and music and cinema does. So in addition to the physical support, at least the well-being and the mental well-being is also very important in this phase. Um, I I mean, it's also frustrates me because I don't know really what's the end goal here. Like what I mean, I'd like to think that no one think that really there is a possibility to completely eliminate a complete bunch of people who are very strong on their cultural identity and on their root to the land and their history and on their collective identity. I mean, if someone think like that is possible, whether anywhere in this part of the world or any other part of the world, then people are mistaken. You know, that's these kind of wars will always fail. And people, you might manage to put people through a very, very difficult period. You might really push them to the line. You might really cram them. You might actually physically kill some of them. But ultimately, people's will of life and will of celebrating that life and will of their collective identity will always prevail. So I don't know. We're living in a time where reasonable politics and smart people in politics is part of the dreams, not realities. So maybe someone believe that this is possible, but I'm never been reassured that the Palestinian collectives will have their dreams realized in self-determinations and freedom. Whatever the political makeup or the contract that we will have, people are stronger than being crushed physically and mentally, but also in terms of their cultural identity where I work. And I hope that what we see now is at some point the last phase of this terrible conflict or oppression or colonization.
Hopefully. Mahmoud Mona, owner of the Educational Bookshop in Jerusalem, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today on Kalam Podcast.
Thank you very much. Maybe my final words here is to encourage people to go to their local bookstores, to continue to believe in the importance of the book and in the beauty of the literature. Until I talk to you later on, maybe our next conversation could be about recommending some books, which is what bookstores should really be doing. So,
indeed, I would love to have that conversation. Actually, let's do that. We also at Kalam Podcast definitely believe in the power of literature. That's the whole thing. Thank you so much, Mahmoud, and take care for now.
Thank you. Have a lovely day. Bye.
You too.